prophecy in Daniel 11, if you go to the internet and you look it up, you're going to find tons of different views. And it's amazing how we get so many different interpretations of this one prophecy. Especially the last 4 or 5 verses. You know, I mean, it's crazy what people do with the last few verses of this book. Yeah. So the prophecy, where I'm going to start here this morning, is to show that this prophecy in chapter 11 is the same story of chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9. It's the same story. It's not a different prophecy. It is not some weird thing that comes at the end. You know, it's the same story. So if we lay a foundation from chapter 2, chapter 7 and 8, and chapter 9, then there's no problem trying to figure out what chapter 11 is talking about. It's history. The problem is that the history is in such shorthand that you have to scratch your head. And one verse covers 100 years, you know, and it's like, really? How did God do that, you know? Well, because he's God. But that's what we need to understand, is that this chapter is just a shorthand chapter of 2,300 years of prophecy, or 2,300 years of history. Do what? Well, no, because he was looking at history. If somebody came to you and told you what was going to happen next year, you wouldn't understand it. If last year, if a year ago, somebody had said, you know, there's going to be a virus that's going to come, and it's going to just upside down this whole world, you would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. I understand flu, but I don't know how a virus is going to tear this world apart. Yeah. So, you know, of course Daniel wasn't going to understand 2,300 years of prophecy or future history. But chapter 10 leads up to it. Chapter 10, Angel Gabriel comes and he says, you know, I've been fighting for 3 weeks with trying to, you know, struggling with Darius because he's given me a hard time here. So I couldn't come and give you this answer until now. But here I am. I've got a few minutes. Now I'm going to tell you real quick what's going to happen in the next 2,300 years. So listen up, Daniel, you know, pay close attention. So that's where we start off. But the history is so accurate. That's where the statement is, this first statement here. This is from R.A. Anderson's book, Unveiling Daniel and Revelation. And Porphyry, as it says here, was a Syrian philosopher from the 3rd century A.D. But when he read through this prophecy, he said that it was so accurate that it could not possibly have been told in advance. Couldn't possibly have been told in advance. Of course, 300 years A.D. looks back about 600 years to some of this history. So Porphyry said, well, you know, what really happened was it was somebody after all these events took place who wrote it all up, and then he wrote it like it was in the future. Used future tense in what he said. Couldn't be that anybody could have written this accurate history before it happened. No, nobody could except God. That's exactly right. Okay, so the statement here is so plain is this prophecy that Porphyry, a Syrian sophist of the 3rd century A.D., claimed it could not possibly have been written before the events occurred, but that it must be the work of some pious Jew pretending to be a prophet. No man could forecast history with such exactitude, Porphyry said. Following his lead, the critics of our day have made the same claim. They disbelieve the truth of this prophecy. And they twist it up, and they do all kinds of imaginative things with this prophecy that is so plainly history. It has no future application. Okay. So, the prophecy starts off and says, I was in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. This is the angel talking. This verse points us back to the fall of Babylon as recorded by Daniel the prophet in Daniel chapter 5. You remember that story? The handwriting on the wall? Okay. So that's what this verse is telling us. I was there at that night, Gabriel says, the angel Gabriel. Yeah, he gives us a time. So Cyrus the Great was the conqueror, but he installed Darius the Mede as the functioning head of state, while Cyrus went on and, conquered other places. He had war to commit here. So, summary, Cyrus the Great was the conqueror of Babylon with Darius the Mede. But Darius the Mede was the co-regent. Co-regent means co-ruler. Looking at the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7, that Daniel chapter 7 verse 5 says, and behold another beast, a second, like unto a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto us, arise, devour much flesh. So what's this bear in prophecy? Mede of Persia. Is that where we are now in this prophecy? Darius the Mede? So we're talking the same thing. Verse 2 says, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, the fourth shall be richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. The 4 kings that are supposed to come up, that not supposed to, they did. He didn't name them, but there were 4, and they were all either sons or grandsons of Cyrus. If Cambyses II, Smerdis, who was only there for 7 months, he was a false king. Darius the first, Xerxes the first, and Artaxerxes the first, who is also the same man that we read about in the book of Esther, Ahasuerus. Same man. So that's it. That's your list of 4. It says we're going to have 4 kings that are going to yet stand up. There they are. History tells us. I mean, it is true that you cannot understand this prophecy in Daniel 11 unless you've got a history book or 2, You won't get it. If you just try to speculate and scratch your head and come up with whatever, then you're going to come up with all these views that are out there on the internet. But if you open up a history book and say, okay, what happened? You get it straight. It's not difficult. So this list of Persian kings, this list covers 100 years of time. This is the territory that Cyrus and Darius conquered. You see the different colors there. So they had all the way over to Macedonia. That's up here in the corner. I don't think my thing works. Anyway, up there in the corner, Macedonia. They didn't have Greece. That's where Athens is. They didn't have Greece. Greece wasn't yet bothered. It didn't come into the picture just yet.
Greece was kind of just a little nobody thing anyway. They don't bother anybody. Nobody was trying to do anything at this time.
Well, Greece wasn't a country. It was a bunch of city-states.
Until Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes in power, and he tried to.
No. He didn't mess with it. There were a bunch of city-states. There were just a bunch of little towns up there. They weren't any kind of power. Greece was a bunch of city-states. They had been there for 400 or 500 years. I mean, that's where you get, the Greek philosophies and the Greek education, the Greek whatever. It goes back 400 or 500 years to 700 BC, 800 BC. But they were city-states. They weren't a threat to anybody. They didn't do war until you get to Philip, who's Alexander's father. And then Philip decided he was going to unite those city-states. Okay, so the Indus River on the far right-hand side, that runs right down the edge of India. So you can see here, that's a long territory. That's all of what we call the Middle East and Afghanistan and whatever over there now, right? Down to Egypt. So they had a lot of territory that they controlled. I don't know what slide I'm on. I've got this key to slides, so I don't know what this is hard. Okay, so when Alexander came up, he took all of this. This is Persia from 539 to 330 BC. What are you doing? Oh, okay. No, that says next slide up. It says, okay. All right, this is slide 7. All right, slide 7, because I've got my notes here that I have to keep to. They're not on the thing here. All right, anyway, 330 BC. Well, Alexander, this also shows Alexander, except it doesn't cover Greece because Alexander was Greek. So this is the Medes and the Persians. When Alexander came up, he captured all of this territory, plus he had Greece. Okay? Alexander conquered, nothing stood in Alexander's way. Alexander never lost a war, never lost a battle. Everywhere he went, his army conquered. They just like fell in front of it. The only battle he lost was the battle with alcohol. Yep. When he had conquered all that territory, and his army was tired. He wanted to go on into India and conquer India. And his army said, look, son, give us a break. Let's kick back a little while, So they did, and they had this big party. And at that party, Alexander drunk himself into a stupor, and he died of an alcoholic fever at the age of 33. No? Oh, yeah, I guess I need to read the verse, don't I? Let me read it. Yeah, so it's on, because he's recording it. Let me read it on the recording. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. That exactly describes Alexander. Absolutely. So the Greek Empire grew to its greatest extent under Alexander, but when he died of a drunken fever, his 4 generals divided up Alexander's kingdom. It was not given to his posterity. He had not yet had the son born to him. His wife was pregnant, but the son was not born until 3 months after he died. So what are you going to do with an infant child? He can't sit on the throne and be a king. So there was a squabble about what's going to happen here, who's going to rule the nation now that we've built here. And it ended up being divided among his 4 principal generals. So the Greek civilization had been around, like I said, for a long time. The first Olympic Games were 776 BC. Democracy was established in Athens in 594 BC. Construction, we all know the Parthenon, right? Okay, the Parthenon, construction of the Parthenon began in 447 BC. So Greece had an extensive civilization, but it wasn't a threat to anybody. No, there was a bunch of city-states, so they were not united. So they didn't get united until, like I said, Phillip of Macedon decided that, okay, all these city-states over there, they all need to be all together. So he went and, without much war, there was some battles, but without much war, he forced them into a group to be with him. And then his son, Alexander, set out to conquer the world. As I was looking this up, isn't this cool? The first picture that I saw, I said, that's Photoshop. because I couldn't believe the colors. And then I kept looking at it, and this is an actual photograph, so it's not photoshopped at all. You can see. Yeah, but this is the extent. The reason I picked this picture, just because it's cool, is that this is the extent to which Alexander got. He got up to Azerbaijan. You know, we kind of know where that is today because, you know, all the Middle East wars we've had. But when I saw this, I thought, wow, I wonder what he thought when he got there and saw those hills. Can you imagine? It was nothing like he saw in Greece. These are all colored by the various minerals that are in these rocks. Isn't that amazing? Okay, through picture shows. Okay, so what slide am I on? I don't know what slide I'm on. Well, yeah, Azerbaijan, that's where it is. That's why I've got this slide. Azerbaijan there, up on the Caspian Sea. So that's where the pretty colored mountains are. Too bad you can't get there. Okay, mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander the Great. No doubt about it. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up.
Well, that's the same thing said in chapter 8, verse 9, or 8. They broke it up and four notable ones for the four winds of heaven. Same thing, it's just like a sportsman, the previous thing.
Well, that's what was going to happen. Yeah. Okay, so this shows the extent of Alexander's empire and shows the routes by which he went various places and conquered. So he had quite an extensive empire, and you have to wonder, how in the world do you control that much territory? You know, how do you manage it? How do you rule it? How do you keep it under control? How do you get it to pay your taxes, you know? So when it was divided up among his four principal generals. And I guess I'll do this first. The prophecy is the same, like I said. This is just a review. The prophecy is the same. The head of gold was Babylon. That's where the prophecy starts off, is with Babylon. At the time we get to the giving of this prophecy, this explanation, Babylon's gone. And the Medes and the Persians have moved in. So now we're in the time of the chest and arms of silver. But yet to come is the belly of brass. That's what we're reading about here in verse 3 and 4. The belly of brass is Greece. It's even named. You don't have to scratch your head over it. It's named in chapter 8. It's named right here in chapter 10. Yeah, so the angel says this is what's going to happen. It's going to be Greece. Greece was already there. It wasn't like Greece was a nothing. Then the legs of iron are Rome divided into two phases and two divisions, because Rome was divided east and west. So it applies to both. And then you've got the feet of clay and iron divided Rome into 10 pieces. That goes along with the 10 horns that we read about in chapter 7. The prophecy in Daniel 11:4 corresponds to Daniel 7:6, and the winged beast, the leopard beast with four heads, right? Same prophecy. If we can figure out chapter 7, you don't have any trouble figuring out chapter 11. The prophecy of Daniel 11 is right there where Leslie was also reading in chapter 8, in which we see the goat and the ram fighting. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand out of the nation, but not in his power. Those four generals that took over, Alexander's empire kind of crumbled. They didn't have the strength that Alexander did. So the Bible explains itself We don't need to try to figure this out with magic or whatever. The Bible explains itself.
History proves that.
History proves it. So these are the names of the 4 generals. It says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. That is the 4 directions of the compass. And not to his posterity, because his son hadn't been born yet, and when he was born, it didn't make any difference. They weren't going to give it to an infant child. Nor according to his dominion that he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. So it's the 4 generals that the kingdom was divided into was Lysimachus, who took Thrace, which is Macedonia, and much of Asia Minor, which today we call Turkey. Cassander ended up with Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy got Egypt, Palestine, Petra, Cyprus, that section. And the Ptolemies held that territory until the death of Cleopatra, the 7th. There were 7 Cleopatras. We only know about the one Cleopatra in the movies, but there were 7 Cleopatras. She was the 7th. And there were 14 Ptolemies, the 14th being at the same time as Cleopatra the 7th. They were brother and sister. And Seleucus the first, Nicator. Now, unfortunately, there were a whole lot of men named Seleucus this and that and the other, and Antiochus this and that and the other. So the history gets confusing because everybody has the same name. If you don't put a date to it, you can't keep track of what's going on. But anyway, these are the 4 generals that divided up the kingdom. Cassander took care of Alexander's mother, wife, and infant son by poisoning them. Yeah, nice, right? But anyway, that's how you dealt with things. Ptolemy was actually, he was a general, but he was Alexander's bodyguard. So he was very close to Alexander. And when Ptolemy went down and took Egypt and the area down in that section of the world, he had the vision that Alexander had of bringing the world into a multicultural environment. He didn't want to destroy things. Okay, you believe what you believe, I'll believe what, we'll just kind of bring it all together here. No big deal. So Ptolemy, you've heard of the library at Alexandria? Ptolemy was the one, this Ptolemy, the first, was the one who started that library. He gathered in books from ancient Greece, from the writings of Aristotle, from the writings of Plato, whatnot. He gathered those books together and began to build this library in Alexandria. That library was there for 200 years. It was the place that people came to learn and study. If you wanted to know math, science, biology, astronomy, whatever, medicine, whatever you wanted to know, you went to the Alexandria Library. Something, it was huge. It was the largest library that like ever existed. Unfortunately, Rome burned it to the ground. Accidentally, but nonetheless, it was destroyed in 48 BC. So anyway, Cassander, I was telling you about Cassander. Cassander decided to take care of any conflict or challenge to his little section of Greece that he got that rightly should have gone to Alexander's son if they'd waited long enough. So Cassander poisoned Alexander's mother, his wife, and his infant son. Then there was no rival to the throne. But Cassander didn't keep his little part of it very long. It was only like 23 years. And he died of a major heart attack. So he was dead. So now, Lysimachus was overthrown by Seleucid. They got into an army, into a war. So Cassander died. He didn't have a son, so nobody would take over his territory. Seleucus got in a war with Lysimachus, destroyed him, and killed Lysimachus. So then those two are gone. So now you just have the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And you get to the prophecy and you say, oh, we have a king of the north and a king of the south. That's how you get to the king of the north, king of the south, because the other two were eliminated. So this is the map of the territory that they controlled. And you see that the red outline is Alexander's territory. So if you're familiar with geography over there, and we should be with all that we've fought and argued over there, everybody ought to know what the Middle East looks like. So that's the territory that they controlled, each one of them. But Seleucus ended up with everything that Lysimachus and Cassander had. Verse 6, and in the end of the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north, and shall make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm. Neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. Well, that's kind of confusing, right? What does all this mean? Well, if you go to the history book, you'll see that there was an agreement, and this zooms ahead. I mean, this just jumps. These verses just jump through hundreds of years of history. Like I said, I'm only going to cover here 23 or 24 verses. That's all I'm going to cover this morning. And we're covering 500 years of history. This really is, what I'm presenting here this morning really is about a semester's worth of study. So, if you get confused, I understand. So anyway, the division now has gotten down to where we're going to see Rome coming in. And the agreement that was talked about here is the agreement between Antiochus Theos, who was the grandson of Seleucus, and the daughter of Ptolemy II. This is boring, I know. Just bear with me. You asked for it. I'm giving it to you. What's a what? 253 BC. So anyway, this woman that comes into the picture here is Bernice. 253 BC, Jerry wants to know. The only problem with Bernice coming into the picture here is that Antiochus was already married to a woman named Laodice. So in order to make this political pact, he divorced his wife, Laodice, and married Bernice, so that then he had an alliance with Egypt. Well, that lasted as long as Bernice's father was alive, who died in 254, so that wasn't very many years. Then, because Antiochus didn't have to worry about this allegiance anymore, because the man that he made the allegiance with was dead, so he threw away Bernice and took back his first wife. I mean, this is real. It's like soap opera. Okay, life's a soap opera, right? Nothing new under the sun. No. I mean, they did the same thing that we see going on in the world today. So anyway, Antiochus cast off Bernice and took back his first wife. Didn't mean the first wife was happy about this. So she lured Antiochus to a city where she had him assassinated. Then she poisoned Antiochus' son so that she could put the one that she wants on the throne. That's what this verse is talking about. And you say, really? So let's read the verse again, right? Huh? Okay, that's the history. Okay. And in the end of the years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south, Egypt, shall come to the king of the north, the king of the Seleucids, to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in those times. That's the history. This little sordid story is the history that's in this verse. That's right. Well, not quite. 200, 300, yeah. Because, Daniel was alive in 500. So, yeah, 300 years in advance. But, the angel says, this is what's going to happen, and he gives it in this shorthand little version. What, 30 words? Something, But when you go to the history book, you read about Bernice, and you read about Antiochus, and you read about Laodicea, and you read about what they did. And it fits the verse. Okay? So, but out of the branch of her roots, this is verse 7, but out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. Did this happen? Yes. Because Ptolemy the third, who was Bernice's brother, said, I ain't going to put up with this. So he launched a war against Seleucid. And did he win? Yes, he did. Is that what the verse said? Yes. Okay? This is a map of the two divisions, the north and the south. And you see that by and large, the Seleucid Empire was much larger because it had Greece, Macedon, Turkey, Asia Minor, plus all of the Middle East over to India. It had all of that. Ptolemy's just had Egypt, So they didn't have as much territory, but they had power. And actually, the Ptolemaic Empire lasted longer than any of them. Because Rome came along, Rome took out the Seleucids first, and then got the Ptolemies. So, verse 9 and 12, 9 to 12. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. This is the Ptolemy that went up and beat the Seleucids, and now he's come back home. And his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come, and shall overthrow, and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up, even in his fortresses. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler or anger, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall be cast down, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. So said the angel. Well, the Seleucid Empire, there were multiple wars. If you read the history of this time, there were multiple wars back and forth between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Almost constant wars. The territory between, on this map, see the little arrow says Jerusalem? It's in the middle. But Israel doesn't figure into this. It's just caught in the middle, right? This is during that 400 years when there's nothing in the Bible about the people of God. That's when, we say, well, you go from Malachi to Matthew. You go from Malachi to the coming of Christ. What happened? This that we're talking about, with these wars going on back and forth. But Israel did not figure into the picture. Israel's prophecy had come to an end. And, we were waiting for the coming of the Messiah, right? So Israel was in that time period when nothing was going on because they were waiting for the Messiah to come. What's the time frame in Daniel chapter 9? The time frame in Daniel chapter 9? 70 weeks is what? 490 years. So this is during that 490-year period that was in Daniel chapter 7 prophecy. We need to think, instead of just, when we study prophecy, we have little pockets. Well, this prophecy means that, and this prophecy means that, and that prophecy means that, but we don't put them all together. They're happening, the prophecies are all talking about the same thing. And we need to pull history together. And if it happened in a different part of the world, so what? It happens at the same time as this, and we need to pull it together. And when you studied history in school, you studied American history. Did you know what was going on in France at that time? No. You didn't study the French Revolution at the same time that you studied American history. You studied the French Revolution on its own. Well, if you don't put it together, you don't see how the world works. We don't live in little pockets of time.
So, when all this is going on between the empires, when this stuff is going on between the empires, Jerusalem or Palestine, whatever that area.
It didn't get called Palestine for hundreds and hundreds of years later. It was Judah.
It was kind of getting torn back and forth between these two empires.
Well, yeah, because, well, one or the other of them controlled it.
Right.
You've heard of the Maccabees.
Right.
Like the Maccabees were like 178 BC, you know. You've heard of the wars of the Maccabees? Well, the Maccabees were being pulled, the Jewish people that lived there, the remnants of the people that lived there were being pulled apart. There were very few true Jews. They were mixed up. They had married into Greek ideas, and the Idumeans who ended up being in control at the time Christ was born, they weren't pure Jews. They had mixed up their genealogy, you know. So, but they were in power at the time of Christ. They had become thoroughly Hellenized. They had accepted the ways of the Greeks, the education of the Greeks, the philosophy of the Greeks. So the Jews at that time weren't pure. There were pockets that were, but the nation itself wasn't really a nation. It had been destroyed, and it had been controlled by either the Seleucids or the Ptolemies, back and forth, back and forth. Whoever occupied that territory at that particular time, that's who was in control. Okay. The Seleucid Empire lasted until 64 BC, when the Roman general Pompey arrived in Antioch. Okay. Now, the reason Pompey was interested over there, Rome was becoming a real power at this time. And it was reaching out, but because it was a republic, it really wasn't out to do war just to do war. It was out to spread peace, they said. And Pompey was a member of the Senate. At that time, it was a republic and had Senate. It was not run by generals, you know, at the time of Pompey. So Pompey shows up on the scene because the Seleucid Empire was aiding the people of Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, because the people on the island of Cyprus were making lots of money running piracy up and down the coast over there. The ships came through, they'd rob them and whatever. So the Seleucids made money off allowing the piracy to take place. Pompey shows up because he's trying to stop the piracy, because with the piracy going on, finance wasn't working, because trade wasn't happening like it was supposed to. So it's all tied into money. So Pompey shows up in order to stop the piracy, and by stopping the piracy, that put him into war with the Seleucids. So the Seleucid armies lasted until 64 BC, when the Roman general Pompey arrived in Antioch and established Syria as a Roman province, bringing an end to the remnants of the Seleucid kingdom. That's almost 30 years, or 35 years, before Cleopatra. The Ptolemaic kingdom lasted until Cleopatra in 30 BC. So verse 16 says, "But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed." This is Pompey. He shall come against him and do according to his will, and none shall stand against him. Nobody stood. I mean, when Pompey came in with his army, you didn't stand. You fought, but you didn't stand. The Roman army was a different kind of army, and they had a different method of warfare. And their method of warfare is what advanced them so that they could fight and not lose men with the way that they lined up their men and fall back, load your bow, fall back, load your bow, whatever. So they advanced with shields, with somebody shooting over the top of them. You know, you couldn't beat the Roman army. So, well, Rome fought with a foot army. Prior to that, people rode on horses. So, but the foot army was so large, they paid their military. So, hey, let's join the army, right? I get paid. Maybe I won't get killed.
Seems like the horse army with horses would be better. Would have been stronger and better.
Well, not with the shields, because they could put a shield up in front of them, and the people behind, you know, the men standing behind the ones with the shields that are advancing, they're shooting over the top.
Yep. And they switch off.
And then they switch off, you know, so they drop back, they switch off. So, you know, they're always advancing with a shield in front of them, protecting them, helmets on. So this whole, and you're this whole line of military, and they're advancing towards the army, you know, what chance have you got of winning when you've got this barrage of arrows coming at you, or, you know, whatever? You know, their whole advance, the whole way that they did their military was completely new, and that's why they were able to conquer. So the Seleucid army falls to Rome. Now we have Rome, and this is what Rome controlled, everything except that green. Even more, because they go up to Britain, or England, as we call it now. They got Spain. They've got North Africa all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So they have the largest extent of territory. They never really, you see that it stops over there with Syria. They never really were able to bring the Persians under control. They fought the Persians for hundreds of years. They fought the Persians from the time of Pompey and Julius Caesar all the way to 300, 400, 500 years A.D. and finally gave up. When Rome crumbled, they gave up. And by 600, you got Islam coming in. So they never did really control the area of the Middle East with Persia and all the way over to India. So, throughout this prophecy of Daniel 11, the power that conquered the king of the north assumed the title king of the north. So the Seleucids had been the king of the north to begin with. The Ptolemies had been the king of the south. When Rome came in and conquered the Seleucid, they became the king of the north. It's simple. You don't have to, I mean, some of the stuff that I've read, the king of the north and the king of the south, that, I mean, it's a major, major fiction. And they get specific that it's this general or it's that king or it's whatever. No, don't nitpick it. Whatever conquered, whoever conquered the king of the north became the king of the north. Whoever replaced the king of the north became the next king of the north.
If a country conquered another country, whether north or south, they became that country became them.
Right.
You know, it's simple.
And the king of the south never changed. The king of the south was always Egypt. All the way down through the prophecy, the king of the south is Egypt. So Rome becomes the king of the north in verse 15 through 17. So the king of the north shall come and shall cast up a mountain, shall take the most fenced cities, And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. Like I told you, the Roman army was unstoppable. And he shall stand in the glorious land, Judah, Palestine, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter in the strength of the whole kingdom, and the upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give them the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Well, now we're getting down to the time of Cleopatra. Huh?
The one that we know.
The one that we know, yeah. The one that was in the movies, yeah. So, Julius Caesar had Pompey assassinated. Of course, we know the story of Julius Caesar, too. He was assassinated by the Senate, right? Everybody that's read Shakespeare knows that, right? Okay. So Pompey moves in. He takes care of the Seleucids. Then it just leaves the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Seleucid dynasty is gone. So when Rome took over the Seleucid dynasty, it took all of its territory. So the only territory that's left is Egypt. And Rome left Egypt alone, principally, because the Ptolemies weren't out to fight with Rome. They just, okay, fine. You know, you can exist. We're not going to destroy you. Until hello, Patty. Until the time of Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy. Cleopatra the 7th, Ptolemy the 14th. Okay. So at first, Cleopatra allied herself, that's what the verse talks about here. I'll tell you the history, and then we'll go back and read it. At first, Cleopatra allied herself with Julius Caesar because it was expedient for her to do so. She even gave birth to Julius Caesar's son on June 23rd, 47 BC. That's how allied she was with him. Like I said, it's a soap opera. But Marc Antony moves into the scene. Now you're into the movie, right? We all know the movie. Didn't we watch the movie? Okay, so you got Cleopatra and Marc Antony. Marc Antony is in competition with Julius Caesar. Political competition. So he goes down to Egypt and forms this alliance with Cleopatra, who has already had a son born to Julius Caesar. And the son was 17 years old by this time. Not a child, 17 years old. So Marc Antony comes down to Egypt and he says, hey, you know, I think that if we align ourselves together, we can probably beat Julius. So Cleopatra says, okay, let's try. And they go to war at a battle called the Battle of Actium, which wasn't in Egypt. It was actually on an island in Greece. But that's where the battle was fought. And a man named Octavian was the one that fought the battle for Julius Caesar. Okay, so in 31 BC, this battle takes place. Cleopatra and Marc Antony lose. Marc Antony commits suicide. Cleopatra commits suicide. So then there's nobody in charge of of Egypt. Rome rules, comes in, takes over. So that gets us to a date of BC 30. BC 30 is going to figure in a little later in the prophecy when we come to another 360-year prophecy. We started with that event there of the fall of the Ptolemaic Empire to the control of Rome and carry it forward to the time of, we'll get there this morning, carry it forward to the time of Constantine the Great. So now let's go back and read this verse again. What are we looking at? The king of the south. So the king of the north shall come and shall cast up a mountain and shall take the most fenced cities, and the armies of the south shall not withstand. The 15. Neither the chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed. And he shall also set his face to enter in with the strength of the whole kingdom, and the upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall be given to the daughter of men, and corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Julius Caesar, Marc Antony, Cleopatra. Can you see it from the history that I just gave you? It's amazing, right? Verse 18. And this shall turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But the prince of his own behalf shall cause reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. And then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall, and not be found. Caesar Augustus Julius Caesar was assassinated by the Senate, right? So the next thing that comes upon the scene, verse 20, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within the few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Octavius won the battle there at Actium. Julius Caesar was assassinated by the Senate. Octavius had been adopted by Julius Caesar, so Octavius becomes the next ruler. Octavius takes the name Augustus, and he calls himself Augustus Caesar. Do we know Augustus Caesar? Where do we read about a raiser of taxes? Luke chapter 2. That's exactly right. Luke chapter 2, verse 1 talks. Do what? Turn my slide. Okay. This is disconcerting for me as it is for you, right? To try to tell you all this history in a short period of time is just, it's just mind-boggling. Okay. So, excuse me. Julius Caesar was assassinated March 15th, 44 BC. Anybody know what March 15th is? We still talk about it today. The Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. No, we get this beware the Ides of March from Shakespeare's play on Julius Caesar. But the Ides is the 15th of the month. So the Ides of March was the day they assassinated Julius Caesar. So Octavius was Julius Caesar's adopted son, not his legal son, but he was his legal son, but not his birth son. He adopted him. So when Julius Caesar was killed, Octavius, after a couple more battles, took over control of Rome. He changed his name to Augustus. And it's the same Augustus Caesar that you talk about, that we read about in Luke chapter 2, verse 1.
Why did he change his name?
Well, he wanted to be called Augustus just because that's what he wanted to be called. I mean, people changed their names all the time back then. And he adopted Caesar because that was the last name of Julius. Okay, so Luke chapter 1, if you want to flip over there just for a minute, we'll verify what we're reading here. Or chapter 2 now, I mean. Luke chapter 2, verse 1. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. So now the prophecy has brought us up to the time of the birth of Christ. We've covered 500 years. Under the rule of Augustus Caesar, the Roman Empire had relative peace. He died in AD 14 at the age of 75 from natural causes. What did the prophecy say? But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. He died of natural causes. One of the few people in this prophecy who did. Right? Yep. So he was succeeded by Tiberius, who was his adopted son, but he was also his stepson and former son-in-law. Figure that one out. Verse 21 and 22. And in his estate, Augustus Caesar's estate, shall stand up a vile person, that's Tiberius, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably. He did when Augustus died. Tiberius just took over. No wars. And shall obtain the kingdom by flattery. There was no war in the transfer of power from Augustus Caesar to Tiberius. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall also be broken, yea, even to the prince of the covenant, which is Jesus Christ. Tiberius was the Caesar at the time Jesus Christ was crucified. So I know this sounds confusing, but I mean, I wish that I could lay out on the table these history books so that you could see the longer discussion of it. I mean, the angel only gave him a shorthand version of it. But there are many, many pages of history that's being discussed here. So just like Porphyry said, this prophecy is too plain. It's too obviously fulfilled in history for it to be true. Well, not really. If we look at the history and say it is true, if we look at the history and say God's word is sure, if we look at the history and say that angel knew what he was talking about, even though he put it all in these confusing words and too many he's and hims and no proper names and, I mean, come on, But if you go to the history books and you look at the history, you find that these verses were fulfilled exactly. Just like the one about Augustus. He's going to fall, but not in battle. He died of old age. He was a raiser of taxes. And if we put it in the bigger context, we see that this prophecy is taking place at the same time that we read about in Luke chapter 1 and 2. The same time that Jesus is born. We put it together. So Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 to 22, are fulfilled through Darius the Mede from 539 to 530 BC. He was followed by Alexander the Great. Darius the Mede, but then you have those four kings, the four sons and grandsons of Cyrus, okay, that was in verse 3. Then you got Alexander, 336 to 323, died at a drunken stupor. All Antiochus and Ptolemy generations from 305 BC to 30 BC, 13 generations in all, okay? Down to Cleopatra the 7th and her brother Ptolemy the 13th, when pagan Rome under Octavius, or who became Augustus Caesar, defeated Marc Antony in the Battle of Actium in September 2, 31 BC. That's 500 years of history crammed into 22 verses. Is it any wonder that it's confusing if you just pick it up and read it and say, I haven't got a clue what this is talking about? You won't understand it without a history book. You cannot understand it without a history book. If you decide not to use history, you can come up with all kinds of imaginative interpretations.
Well, it's no different than Daniel chapter 3. You don't use history or anything. Let it interpret itself. You just so confused.
Yeah, except Daniel chapter 2 is pretty straightforward because the explanation is given in Daniel chapter 2. Thou art this head of gold, And after you are going to come more kingdoms. So you cannot deny that the next kingdom that came after it was Medo Persia, and the next one was Greece, and the next one was Rome. I mean, nobody can deny that. Well, not so much chapter 2, because it's too straightforward. No, you won't. If you don't get that straight, and if you don't get chapter 7 straight, and chapter 7 is explained in chapter 9 because it says in chapter 8, because chapter 8 says, you know, these two powers are Medo Persia and Greece. You know, the angel tells you. You can't argue with that. That's what the Bible explains itself. Yes. So if you forget all of that and you get over to chapter 11 and say, oh, well, this is a whole new thing. I don't know what this is talking about. And then you start trying to interpret it without looking at the past prophecies and without looking at the explanations of the past prophecies that explain it all the way up to Rome. You've got Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece. You know, Rome is not named. But if you follow the prophecy, the next thing that comes is Rome. A lot more information in a short period of time and covers 2,300 years from chapter 1 to the end. 2,300 years. The same thing that we have in chapter 8. 2,300 years. It's the same thing. Okay. So I had 2 more slides here. And this is for the ladies group. Because when we were talking, remember I told you that so this has nothing to do with Daniel chapter 8. I mean, chapter 11. And oh, by the way. So, oh, by the way, I told you I was looking for pictures on Tuesday, and I couldn't find them quickly. That's because I have too many pictures. But anyway, the Roman Empire, the crumbling Roman Empire. This has nothing to do with chapter 11. Has nothing to do with our discussion that we just had. This has to do with what we were talking about Tuesday morning. So, end of discussion for chapter 11. And I'm talking to Dorothy now. So, those tribes that invaded Europe and split the Roman Empire into 10 pieces, that's what this is talking about. This shows the various battles of the Roman Empire crumbling. This is the divisions that it fell into, those 10 barbarian tribes. The Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Lombards, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, the Burgundians, the Visigoths, the Suevi, and the Vandals, the 10 divisions. 3 of them were plucked up, right? That was the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals. Okay? So that's that illustration.